Thank you, Michael. Speaking of an adventure, I recall, I think I was here just 1 year, maybe 2 years, and came back from a summer trip abroad and had a number of voice messages on my answering machine. I don't know if you've ever heard of an answering machine. There used to be, a separate little device that sat at home. All messages from Tom Smith, who wanted to talk to me about this new program that he wanted to start that was already underway. And so I called him as soon as I could, and it was what he laid out to me was really the beginning of an adventure. It was I had never heard of a vision of education quite like that, and he won me over immediately. I think at that point only Gene McCarraher here was on board, so the three of us were the first core, and then our first hire was a woman named Jeannie Heffernan. I didn't realize I was interviewing also for my future wife, so I got a wife and family out of this too, in addition to some really great memories and friendships and a lot of great experiences. So thank you. It's really a delight to be back. I want to begin with actually kind of a bleak observation to sort of set the tone. The observation is, it seems to me that we have spiritually accommodated ourselves to a world of mere stuff. We have gotten accustomed to a world of mere stuff. So what do I mean by that? What do I mean by mere stuff? It seems to me that for us, the world is flat. It's a world that doesn't really speak to us. It doesn't really take hold of us. It doesn't grip us, except in really extreme cases. It's only the things that present themselves to us with a certain violence, a sense of crisis or danger or sensation that we notice. But the normal everyday world tends to just slip by. We tend to notice things, it seems to me, only insofar as they can serve some immediate purpose or gratify some immediate need or fit into something that we've already planned. But we're not very often struck by ordinary things. It's kind of a banal sort of world. I think this is something, I assume you all know what I'm talking about. I think this is something we've all experienced. Maybe one of the most compelling pieces of evidence, I think, for this is children's toys, the kinds of toys that children play with these days. It seems to me they tend to be loud, obnoxious, frenetic, garish in their colors, with just sort of stupid, exaggerated features, screaming at children. And if you think about that, what's going on? Why in the world would we have toys that scream at kids? It seems to me that the toys are little tiny confessions of despair. They're little tiny. They're tokens of nihilism, I think. They tell us that there's nothing in the world just naturally worth looking at. There's nothing that's simply worth just being with. We have to be sort of pounded over the head by them. It seems to me that there's expressed in these things something like a desperate grasping at the dwindling resources of attention. Again, I think this is probably something that you have all experienced in some respect. Now, it seems like I'm going on a long time about toys, but the reason I am, it seems it actually gets us right to the heart of what I want to talk about tonight. And I'm going to unfold the theme in just a moment. But I do want, before I do that, I would like you just to sort of keep that image in mind. Just think of the most obnoxious toy that you've experienced, all right? And then contrast that with the simplest possible toy, sort of traditional toy. I was thinking, okay, what's the simplest, most obvious sort of thing? How about wooden blocks? Think about wooden blocks. What is a wooden block? Imagine holding a wooden block in your hand. Imagine, just think about it's a subtle thing, but I think we can all actually, we all know what I'm talking about. The kind of delight and pleasure your hand feels touching something that's real wood, and it's got a certain heft. And, to help see that, think about the difference between that and holding something that's just cheap plastic. There's no sort of delight. And a block, what is it? It's so simple. It's a perfect shape. They tend to have very simple colors, true colors, red, blue, green, very straightforward. So I just I want you to sort of think about these two things and ask yourselves, what are we saying about the world, about the nature of the world and the nature of a child, the nature of the human being, when we give a child a set of blocks on the one hand, or we give a child one of these sort of screaming toys on the other? What are we saying about the world? What are we communicating to the child? So I'm posing this question at the outset here, and I want to sort of plant the question. And I'll be talking about some other things, but I'll come back to that at the end and think about it with you. But before I start unfolding, just to return again to the original observation I made, I said that we have spiritually accommodated ourselves to a world of mere stuff. When I say accommodated, I have in mind a two-way sort of relationship. On the one hand, it seems to me we've accommodated the world to ourselves. So we have fashioned the world in a particular way. We've built into the things that we talk about material culture, the built world, the world that we live in. We fashion this world in a particular way that has a kind of a character, has a kind of ethos, a tone and color that is a result of our activity. But I also think the relationship goes the other way around as well. I think the built world that we've created for ourselves also in turn fashions us. It molds us in ways that I think we tend not to be aware of. It gives us a sense of, it's sort of the setting, it sets a horizon in which we live. It opens up a certain way of thinking, a place, you might say, spiritual place where we live and move and have our being. And this place has an ethos or a character, and it forms our imagination as well. It gives us a sense of what's important, what's not important, a sense of what's possible, of what's worth striving after. It gives us an order to our lives in ways, as I said, that I think we tend not to notice. Okay? One of the points of my presentation is to try to call our attention to that, to notice it and think about it. And I want to suggest that noticing it, this is part of what wonder is about, coming to notice these subtle ways that the world is speaking to us, informing us, and then to achieve wisdom both in the sense of being able, therefore, to enter into the world more deeply because of this awareness, but also to have wisdom about how to properly fashion. How do we make a world that we actually want to live in, a meaningful world? Okay, so in order to help call this to our attention, I'm going to speak mostly now tonight about the meaning of symbols. That's going to be really the core of this presentation. I think symbols are more fundamental to our lives than we tend to realize. I think it's actually proper to define the human being as a symbolic animal, in fact. I think symbols are much more fundamental to our lives than we realize. And if we can grasp that, we'll also understand why we'll already achieve, I think, a certain awareness of that allows a more meaningful world as I've described it. Okay, so first I'm going to do 3 sections here. The first one, I want to talk about the nature of a symbol. In the what might seem like a strange sense, the way I'll be using it. And then second, I want to try to make a case for why symbols are more common and prevalent than we realize. That in fact, I'm going to suggest that everything is symbolic. Everything is symbolic in some sense. Natural things, man-made things, they're all symbolic in some sense, in the sense that I'm going to describe. And then third, very briefly, just raise the question, what does this all mean? What does this imply for how we should live? Okay, so those are the 3 sections. All good? Yeah? All right. First of all, what is a symbol? We normally think of symbols, it seems to me, as signs, okay? And this is the normal sense, especially conventional signs. A sign that is a kind of a nonverbal means of communication. You have some kind of a thing that will point to a concept or a meaning. So, for example, green and red are colors, but they also serve a kind of symbolic purpose, directing traffic. They tell people to stop and go, and there's nothing about green or red intrinsically that would do that. We've just decided that those colors work, so that they're symbolic. Maybe in a more interesting way, we think of symbols as present in literature, in art, in movies. There's a very sort of simple, straightforward, very banal example. The black and white hats in a Western film. You immediately know what that means. You see the white hat, you're supposed to think, okay, he's a good guy. Black hat, he's probably not. But symbols can also become very complex and even obscure, maybe even intentionally obscure, like 2001: Space Odyssey. The obelisk there. Nobody knows what that's supposed to mean. It's clearly a symbol, so I'm sure nobody knows. Now, I think it'd be interesting to think, well, what purpose does it serve? Why don't you just indicate a person as a good guy or a bad guy? What is achieved by symbolically presenting that rather than just stating it outright? I find that an absolutely fascinating question. I've actually always been fascinated by that question. That's not the question I'm going to be talking about, though, here tonight. It's just something worth thinking about. But I think we all at least have had the experience, if you're watching a movie or something and you suddenly realize, wait a minute, that's a symbol for something. You feel a certain delight or pleasure. There's something we sort of enjoy. Okay. This sense of symbols, I want to suggest, is totally wrong. Is not the best. Well, yeah. Let me tone that down a little bit. As my old colleagues recall, I'm prone to exaggeration. Okay. I don't think that's the best way to think about symbol. I think that's a kind of a superficial way to think about symbol. It seems to me that is more what I would call allegory than symbol. So the word allegory, you've probably all heard the word before. The etymology of allegory comes from Greek words allos, meaning other, and agorein, which is a verb that means to proclaim, to make publicly manifest. So an allegory proclaims a meaning that's other. It points to some other meaning. So you see red and you think stop. Your mind goes to a meaning that's not present in the red light, but it's something that the red light simply makes you think about. And the way allegories work, they're totally conventional. If you think about it, you can understand what it means to stop. and you can appreciate a red light. They don't need each other at all. It just happens to be the case that when you see red, you're supposed to stop. You first look at the red light, and then you infer this other meaning. There's a kind of a serial, first one and then the other. That's how allegories work. You grasp the thing and you think away to the concept. Now, if this is what symbols are all about, if you think that this is what symbols are all about, you have a lot of trouble appreciating the way symbols have actually functioned in culture. Any anthropologist or liturgist will tell you that's just not an adequate way of understanding what a symbol is. So I'd like to propose a different way of thinking about a symbol. Okay, what's this other way? And if you're interested, you can ask questions about it. There'd be a lot to say about this, but I'll just propose the way that I find fruitful to think about symbol. So the word symbol is also from a Greek word. It comes from the word basically to throw together. Balein means to cast or to throw, and sun means together. So a symbol is something that's joined together, that comes together. It's very interesting and absolutely crucial to the meaning of symbol to think about its original context. So the original symbols were something called tesserae hospitalis, tesserae, parts of hospitality. And the original use of symbol, when one would have a guest, would entertain a guest, and establish a kind of a bond of friendship, there was a ritual that would occur. One would take a potsherd or a bone or something and divide it in two. And one party would keep one half and the other party would keep the other half. And that was a ritual to sort of affirm, yes, we are friends and this bond will remain. And it's the abidingness of the bond is kept in the pieces. So the two parties could not see each other for years, but they held on to the piece, knowing that they can always join them together, and that would be another ritual of friendship that would bring them back together. And they could even pass these down to their heirs, who then could also sort of reclaim the friendship. There was a kind of a built-in memory of the friendship that is there. Now, think about that. If that's what, so symbol, you would join together, symboline, right? Think about the difference between that and this allegory thing, like red pointing to stop. What's going on in a symbol? Notice, these aren't just an outward sign pointing to a concept that we could think about on its own. Instead, they have their proper place in a ritual. And in that ritual, something real is coming about and being established by means of the symbol. And those who are participating in the symbol, they could conceptualize it. They could tell you what's going on, but that's not the heart of the matter. What's the heart of the matter is they're entering into, they're being actually taken into the meaning. Body and soul, their whole person is being taken up into this meaning. They're participating in it. So through the symbol, they're entering into a meaning. It's not away, it's not absent like the concept. It's present in the thing. In a certain sense, it's amazing. It's so present in the thing. I'm sure all of you have an example of something like this in your life, something that you have that reminds you of a person. If you think about it, the people who cherish the friendship would also cherish that token. And if they were to lose it, there would be a sense of loss, because there's a certain sense in which the friendship remains in this physical thing. It's a remarkable phenomenon. They recognize that the friendship transcends it. You know, the friendship is more than just a piece of ceramic, but it's also present in it. Goethe once said, he always said some sort of confusing things, but he said, a symbol is the thing and it's not the thing. And that's about right. It's both sort of present but kind of transcendent. Okay. Now, I really want to emphasize the physical reality of the thing here. It's actual unique presence in space and time. It's not just, again, a sign that's conveying information, but it's a thing. It's a thing that is present. A second thing that I want to emphasize, and this is more subtle, but I think it's really crucial, is that there's also a religious dimension that's built into the symbol. If you think about the ritual of friendship in the ancient world was always understood as a kind of religious event, that this is something that was watched over by the gods. In fact, it was one of the highest religious events. Now, some people will say, well, of course the ancient world thought that because these relationships were so necessary for their survival that they injected religious significance into it. But I think there's more going on there. It seems to me that if you could try to imaginatively put yourself into this experience of the ritual of friendship, you would receive that friendship as a gift from above. It's something that's elevating you to something beyond where you were before. You're transformed by it. Now, it might seem like I'm exaggerating. This time I'm not exaggerating at all. This is really true and it's real. And think about it. It's establishing sort of a new point of a reference point or a new condition, a new center of gravity that causes you in a way to repattern your life. It changes you in a significant way. And that kind of a transformation, human beings have always recognized as a religious experience of some sort. I think this is built into all proper symbols, something analogous to this. Now, to sum up, think about it. There's a natural thing with the symbol, the Tesserae Hospitalis, it's an actual physical object. There's a kind of intellectual thing, you're understanding a meaning, and then there's a religious dimension. And notice how all three of these things are tied up with each other. They're not separate parts to a whole. They're all kind of inseparable parts. To illustrate this, it seems to me one of the most helpful ways I have found, the most helpful illustrations of what I'm talking about here can be found in the short story, also movie, Babette's Feast. How many of you have read that before, maybe seen it? Okay, good. Whew. Enough. I've read it again just recently. I'm always amazed at how beautiful that story is. It always takes me by surprise. Think about the feast in the story or in the movie. It's a symbol in exactly the sense that I'm talking about. Okay, so it's not just the symbol that they have that obviously is the central event of the story. It's not just a sign that's pointing to an absent meaning. It's actually something, it's a reality that's making a meaning manifest, making it present. And this is the interesting thing. It's making it present for the characters who are involved. I'll just relate a bit of the story in just a moment. But I think it's also something that's made present for the reader. It's not just for the characters. I think one can read Babette's Feast or any story like that in a primarily allegorical way. You think, oh, here's a symbol of this, and this is a symbol of that, and you puzzle out the meaning. But at this deeper level, there's a kind of an event in the feast that they have, and that's something that the reader is able to share in from a distance, and in a certain sense enter into the meaning analogously. Okay, so let's recall the basic story. If for those of you who've read it, if you haven't read it, I think you can. It's a very simple plot. You have Babette arrives. This is a French woman who arrives destitute, sent by friends to this village in Norway that you might say is a symbol-starved village. This is a very it's very Protestant. The author emphasizes this in the sense of having a kind of anti-sacramental sense of Christianity, where you want to in a way, avoid the sort of indulgence of the physical. She presents it in a very sort of exaggerated way. But Babette is taken care of by these two sisters who are devoted to her and allow her to help. And if in the course of the story, she ends up winning this massive lottery. And the sisters think, okay, now she's going to take her money and go back home. But she asks them for the permission to give them a party, basically, to host, to make a dinner for them in Thanksgiving for everything that they've given. So think about this ritual friendship here, to make a dinner for them. And they're very reluctant, but the rules of hospitality, they have to say yes. And so they say yes, but they immediately become afraid about what this is going to imply. They're worried about all the strange things that she's going to make, and they're worried about the kind of sensual indulgence that this feasting might imply. So the sisters and the people in the community resolve not to enjoy it, that they're going to go through the motions of eating and talk about spiritual things and do their best not to even taste the food. So you might say, think about what's going on. They're trying to sort of treat it allegorically. They're trying to, in a way, leave the physical thing and think about the spiritual meaning, and in a way leave the physical stuff behind. But what's amazing in the story, and it's so beautifully. If you haven't read it, please do before you go to bed tonight. It only take you 20 minutes. It's a short story. It's extraordinary. It'll bring you to tears at the end. It really did. I've read it 30 times the last time. I had to dry my eyes. All right. It's a beautiful story. They make this resolve, but amazingly, the food itself overcomes them. So you might say it's the symbolic density overcomes them in spite of themselves, in spite of what they're trying to think about. They are, in a way, taken up into this higher meaning. And it becomes an extraordinary thing that suddenly these old hostilities among people in the community fade away. Old memories come back, and you realize that it's a profoundly supernatural event, almost, this event of forgiveness and grace, where the difference between what's possible and what's actual fall away, the difference between the past and the present fall away, the difference between the individuals fall away. They're all joined together, symbalein. They're brought together, and they're grasped by this meaning, which has a religious dimension. By joining together with the meal, they're joined together also to each other. The thing itself, the food itself that they eat, becomes a kind of an extraordinary focal point of meaning, gathering them all, making their connection effective. And notice, it's important that it's good food that does this. So it's not the case that the more attention they give to the physical stuff, the less religious it is, or the less personal, or the less meaning. It's precisely the opposite. There's a total coincidence of the physical beauty, goodness, the spiritual meaning, and the intelligible meaning. It all comes together. Yeah, so read the story. One of the first usages of the notion of symbol in Christianity, does anybody know what is the symbol of the faith? The original symbol of the faith, where that phrase was used. So immediately, I think we're thinking, okay, was it the fish? Was it the... Okay, the original phrase, symbol of the faith, was actually the creed. Now, what in the world, how is that a symbol? It seems to me if we have this allegorical sense of what a symbol is, it's hard to make sense of what that is. I think we understand it if we think about it like Babette's feast. The creed is something that is spoken together. You say these physical words together, and in saying them together, a bond is established, a kind of you're being joined together with the words and with the theological meaning and with the people in the faith. The point is that the creed, it had a liturgical function, just like a ritual function, just like the Tesserre Hospitalis, just like the dinner at Babette's feast. It joins us together in the reality of the faith. Okay, so that's an exposition of the nature of symbol. Part 2. At this point, I want to shift, okay? I want to make a claim about things more generally now in the light of that presentation of the nature of symbol. We've been talking about, with Babette's feast, sort of strange and unusual, sui generis sort of things. But I want to suggest that what we see in that story and what we can experience in that actually has relevance for all of reality in some respect, even though we've tended to forget this. It's operative analogously, you might say, differently but in a related way in all of the things of our normal existence, to the extent that the things of our existence are things at all in the proper sense, to the extent that they're symbols in the sense that I'm describing here. And my proposal is, if we can begin to open ourselves in a kind of habitual way and wonder to this, we will have a much more human existence. Reality itself is a feast. Okay, to help us see this, I'm going to draw on the work of the very obscure, complicated philosopher Martin Heidegger, who, had some very problematic ideas, but it seems to me that he had some incredible insights into the nature of things, and I think it's really helpful in the context that I've been trying to sort of sketch here. Heidegger, this German philosopher from the 20th century, presented things as what he called places of gathering, the focal point of gathering. And it's interesting, etymologically, the word thing, actually, if you look it up, it's interesting. It comes from the word assembly, gathering. That's actually a proper etymology of the word. What I want to suggest is that when Heidegger talks about things as gathering, it's very similar to what I've been trying to suggest a symbol does as bringing together, joining together. Gathering and joining together are more or less the same thing. Now, his theory about this is very complicated, very mysterious, and I'm not going to get in all the complicated details. I just want to present one aspect of what he says, and I want to do so by means of an example that I think is pretty eloquent. One of the things that Heidegger is best known for is this notion that his thing is that everything is a kind of a revelation, what he calls like a revelatory event. Now, that seems very odd, but think about it for a moment. I think we can get at what he's talking about if we take a simple example. I ask you to call to your imagination. On the one hand, if you've ever seen an image of, and if I were more adept, I'd show an image of a medieval water mill. So a water mill built on the side of a river, right, that would grind grain into flour. And you'd have one of these in a village, and the people would come and they'd bring the flour and there was this sort of communal grinder so that they could, or bring their grain and return with flour. Compare that on the one hand to a hydroelectric power plant on the other. And I think we all can envision that. Now, in a certain sense, they're very similar. These two things are very similar, right? They're both things that have been made by man to accomplish some kind of a human purpose, to fill a human need. They're similar in that respect. But I think we all recognize there's also something really profoundly different about them. So first, think about the mill. What is it? In a certain sense, as I say, it's a thing. It's a thing in itself, and it's as a thing. Philosophers use strange examples here and talk in strange ways about this. But just see if you can hold on to this. A mill is a thing. it's separate from other things that surround it. It's separate from the river. It's separate from the rocks and soil, the animals that might live there. It's distinct from, it stands out over and against the sky, the clouds, and so forth, the people that use it. It's a thing unto itself. It's its own thing, we might say. In that sense, it's separate. Okay, as a physical thing, it's separate. Now, it's also a meaningful thing, and here we have to go a little deeper in our imagination. It's a meaningful thing. It's not just meaningful in itself, but I want to suggest in its physical presence, it radiates meaning. It actually joins things together meaningfully beyond itself. And in this sense, it's symbolic. Okay, what do I mean? Consider the fact that it, on the one hand, think about what does it mean? You look at a mill, you see, for instance, that it expresses man's use of nature, a human use of nature. But it expresses a use of nature that's obedient, necessarily obedient to the natural things. It has to, it's dependent on the movement of the water in the river. It's somehow integrated into a kind of natural rhythms and a natural order. And when you think of the mill and you think about the kind of work that's done, it calls to mind things like the rhythm of the harvest. This is something that would be used at certain times of year. When harvest is happening, it would follow the rhythms of the sun up and down. There's a kind of a natural course. And then think about the kind of work. This is when you're bringing your grain to a mill, in a way, it indicates a kind of completion of work. There's a certain joy. The labor has been finished, and we're turning it now to enjoyment. It symbolizes social cooperation. If you think about it, it's very different from having like an electric grinder in your home. You have to go to a particular place in the village, and everybody came to this place. And you can imagine the conversations. And they would all make use of this. And this is the person who tended it would be responsible for it all. There's a kind of a social cooperation. And if you wanted to carry out, we could also think about some of the religious dimensions of that. But in any event, what I want to propose in drawing and sort of thinking through this is notice how this particular thing, the mill, is like a focal center of significance that interprets the reality around it. It interprets the meaning of human labor. It's kind of an interpretation of human work and of the natural world. In that sense, I want to suggest it's got a kind of a meaningfulness that gathers up the things around it and sets them in order in a way. It joins them together in a common meaning for a common good. Now, it's not hard when you start thinking about that to see that there's something similar to the kind of joining together that we saw in Babette's Feast. Even though it's much more subtle and less dramatic, it's still real, and it's still, I think, really important. Now, we might contrast this, and I'm not going to elaborate this example, with a hydroelectric plant, which doesn't communicate in the same sort of way, this harmony with nature. It communicates a different relationship to nature. And it's also, in a certain sense, you might say it communicates something of social cooperation. But if you think about it, it's a very different kind of cooperation. It doesn't bring people together to a place. It sends electricity out to individual homes. And the whole kind of creates a very different sort of ethos. It's social cooperation of like a bureaucracy more than something you might say like a dance. In this respect, it doesn't gather things together in the same sort of way. It actually, in a way, leaves them in their isolation. It separates them in another respect. Okay. Now, for Heidegger, and I think this is true, both the mill and the power plant are revelations of meaning. They're both meaningful. But notice they're meaningful in very different ways. As I'm suggesting, one has a meaning that is natural, organic, kind of harmonized. The other one communicates a meaning that separates. Think about if a symbol joins. This is joining things in the opposite movement. It's joining things in a way that isolates and separates. Do you know what the etymological opposite of symbol is? Some of you probably know this. It's diabolical. That's the opposite of symbol. You might say that a symbol that casts asunder, that separates, is diabolical rather than symbolic. Just something to think about. I want to suggest to you that everything in the world is, in a certain respect, I mean, even this, everything, even this, is a center of significance that sort of casts, that everything that exists in a way interprets the world around it, around itself. It gives a certain tone, a certain meaning, a certain sense to things. More than just items of use, things are interpretations of the world. And this interpretation I'm suggesting is built into things, built into them. It's present in them. And therefore it's present in our use of things. It's present in our relationship to things, and it's present in ways that affect us beyond what we're aware of, that have an effect on the way we think about ourselves, the way we think about the world. In profound ways, the things that we surround ourselves with set the horizon for our existence, set the stage, you might say, and the coloring. You might think of it as the background music. And think about how much background music can change the action in a drama. All things generate a kind of background music that we need to start listening to and think about what it's saying about the world. All right, that leads me to my last point, which I said will be quick, short. What's the implication of all this? The implication is, what I'm suggesting is we need to open ourselves in wonder to become aware of these things, their meaningfulness, to become attentive to the symbolic nature of the reality that we inhabit, and that as we do so, we can grow in wisdom, the kind of wisdom that enables us to enter more deeply into our relationships and into the world, but also that makes us increasingly aware of the need for wisdom in building the world that we build. That we need to think about the interpretation that we give to the world in the things that we make and the things that we enjoy far beyond what we're aware of. So think now back to the screaming toy and the blocks. What interpretation of the world is communicated in a toy that can only be looked at if it imposes itself in this kind of hyper frenetic sort of way? What does that say about the meaning of the natural world? What does that say about human nature? What does that say about what it means to be a child? What it means to relate to others? And compare that to something, as I said, simple, like a wooden block, something that, in a way, think about this, okay? Hold a block in your imagination, a genuine block, and it binds you to the world. It's when you appreciate something that's real like that, you're establishing a connection to the world that is a beautiful thing if we are attentive to it. Now contrast that with holding something that's unreal. That kind of subtle, it's very subtle, but it's meaningful. It separates us from the world. It gives us a kind of, an ethos of distraction and unease and anxiety. These are when we think about those kinds of experiences, we tend to respond principally with moral exhortations. We need to act differently. We need to try to treat others better and that kind of thing. But I want to suggest that the moral questions are really secondary, as crucially important in some level. But what's at stake in this is our ontological questions. We're talking about the body of meaning of the culture that we live in. And in the end, this is the heart of the matter. This is the heart of what it means to live in a world, and it's the heart of human existence. Isak Dinesen said it correctly. She is the author of Babette's Feast, but a beautiful little line in there that I think it's nice to end on here. She said, she reminded us, we might say, that the world is not, in the end, a moral, but a mystic concern. Think about that. All right, thank you.
Open the floor for questions. Dr. Shinden, do you mind fielding? Questions, thoughts?
Worries, anxieties. Yes.
Hi, I was just wondering what advice would you give somebody who is interested about the humanities field and looking to go into the major?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, talk to this guy. But I think that's an excellent impulse, because whatever whatever anybody does, we're going to do it as a human being. I mean, there's no getting out of the human condition. We're all in it, and it's going to follow us wherever we go. It seems to me it's similar to this reflection on the meaning of things. We also need to reflect on the meaning of human existence, and doing so will open up dimensions of any other field one might want to study, or any other path that one might follow. Every path is going to be a human path. So I think it's oddly, some people say, well, rather than being all kind of artsy and so forth, you need to be practical, and you need to study something practical and justify. I mean, you hear it over and over again. It sounds like a pitch, but it's actually true. And you can statistically show that it's true. It's actually also more practical to study something like humanities, because it enables you, and I'm sure you've heard this before, but it enables you to do whatever you end up doing well. How many people in the world end up in a line of work that corresponds to their major? It seems to me very, very, very few. Very few. What if their major were something totally narrowly designed? It helps them not at all in what they end up doing. But if you go deep, think about studying humanities is about going deep. It's going to be relevant anywhere. In that sense, anything you end up doing professionally will be relevant to your major.
So you talked about reality itself being a feast, and kind of the vice that we fall into is the failure to look at the world symbolically and all these things. And if that's kind of a vice on that end, is there such a thing in your eyes as an excess of that? Is there such a thing as indulging too much in symbol? And
that's a fascinating question. I don't know that I've ever met anybody that I would say, yeah, too symbolic. I suppose it seems to me that this is what I would say.
Instead of seeing the block as an actual block,
right? No, this is exactly. I would say that if it seems like they're being too symbolic, it's because they're being allegorical. Right. Allegoric is like, you don't look at something as meaningful. You in itself, you think it's supposed to point beyond itself to some other meaning. And so, in that sense, somebody who's too preoccupied with the deeper meaning of things won't be attending to what's right in front of them. But compare that to the feasters at Babette's feast. They were entering deeply into the meaning, but did that draw them away from the taste of the food? Not in the least. I mean, precisely the contrary. So I don't know that this joining together is a joining together of body and soul, right? Is it possible to do that too much? I don't think so. I think you if you do it, if it's proper, there's no limit. But tell me if I'm maybe missing. If you have a follow-up question, okay.
I'll think about it.
Okay. Thank you for the question. Yes.
You said that there are some things that bind us to the world and others that separate us. Would you say that there's a fine line separating the two, or is there like a gray space in between?
Yeah, that's great. It depends. In some places, in some examples, it's extreme. Like we can think of very extreme things. Think about comparing. This is trivial, but I'm not as good as some people's thinking on my feet. But I'm gonna stick with the blocks for a moment. Compare that to some other kinds of activities, say like a super violent video game or something, right? Does playing that game that would be you would see, okay, yeah, that's someone who's constantly involved in these games. You would worry about their relationships with other people, and because there's a certain kind of habit that would create. And so there's an extreme example, but they can be really subtle, and when I make these distinctions, it might sound like I'm hating on artificial stuff or something. I think artificial stuff is great as insofar as it can communicate reality to us. These aren't like dismissive judgments, but compare. This is something I've noticed. Okay, there are a couple really interesting experiences. Compare candle light to artificial light. They're both illuminating a room, but there's something about the quality of the light. Why is it that you at a romantic dinner you'll have a candle on the table, but you wouldn't put a fluorescent bulb there? You wouldn't. Why? It would spoil the mood. Why would it spoil the mood? It's lighting things up just like the other. Well, no. There's something in the flame, and it's flickering. It's warmth. It's making present a kind of light that's very different from that. Or I mean, the difference holding in your hand like a styrofoam cup, and holding in your hand. I've been thinking a lot about hands. I think there's a lot more that's communicated in the sense of touch than we tend to be aware of. But holding in your hand a real mug or a beautifully made mug. So I have a beautiful ceramic mug made by where's Dr. Hughes? There, right, by Dr. Hughes' wife. He brought when he stayed with us once, and it's beautiful to hold in your hand. And the thing that's interesting about it, it's not just. I mean, even if there weren't a personal connection, there's something about starting your day with a real cup in your hand as opposed to an styrofoam thing. But then also the personal history of it is also still present in it. There's something I think of Kevin when I use that mug. I mean, you can't help it. It's just you think of it, and even you find yourself thinking about it sort of without being totally aware. Now, it seems to me, what if it were the case? I mean, just imagine this. Sorry, I'm going beyond your particular question, but just imagine if there was nothing in the world but things like ceramic cups, the mug that someone made for you, like all of the things that we would wear, we would sit in, we would see had that kind of significance. I mean, just think about how much better life would be, right? I mean, there would be something beautiful about existence. that you wouldn't even have to think about. You would just be in it. It would be present to you. I think that's undeniable. Yeah, so it's subtle, but I think, again, that's the point. If we become aware of these things, we'll see it's subtle, but it's real, and it's important. And it can be life-changing if you embrace it, I think.
Yeah, I have a few questions, but I'll limit myself to one. Just thank you for your talk. It's really thought-provoking. So we may not be able to have control over like how many styrofoam cups there are versus mugs, but practically over the spaces that we do have control over, how can we implement some of the insights you raised to try to craft a more symbolic and meaningful space? I'm thinking also about like when our families are growing. I have a 2-year-old at home. We have to make decisions about, well, how much screen time do we,
That's right.
All these questions. But I'm just wondering if you have any practical advice about how to
thank you.
Spaces.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the place to think about it. And I do think that there's one in which there's a lot that we don't have any control over it. But as you say, we can too easily fall into the trap of thinking, well, there's so much that I don't have control over it, so I may as well just not worry about this. Yet another thing to worry about. It is the case that there are very small things that we do have a lot of control over. Think about the way you organize your living space and the things that occupy your living space, and the things that your children are exposed to. I use the example of wooden blocks here. I didn't understand when my wife and I were having kids why she was so obsessed with like wooden toys. And I came to understand that later and appreciate it very much. But those are very simple things. Now, screen time and so forth, that's going to be there. But it seems to me it makes a very big difference if these things are in the center of your life and they're at the margins of your life. So for instance, we have a microwave, all right? We have a microwave. And the microwave is located in the basement. And you have to sort of climb over stuff to use it. And now there are times where that's actually the right instrument to use. Like making nachos, you need a microwave. You're not going to make nachos in the oven, right? You make nachos. But to use it, you have to actually go down the stairs, climb over stuff, and then use it. And you realize that you've removed precisely the thing that justifies its existence, which is convenience. And now the only reason we'll use it is when it's the right thing to use. And it's rarely, in fact, I don't think I've used it in years, but but notice precisely because it's not right in front of your face. Put things that are not essential in hard to reach places. That's a really practical thing, but I think there's something to that. Make it harder to work on your laptop or something, or whatever it might be.
Bear with me through this question.
Sure.
I thought of it and it might make no sense. Do you think an object which holds symbolism can lose its symbolism when hypothetically a person who gifted you like the item could hurt you, or does it just like tarnish its original meaning?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that when you realize that this is the really interesting thing. When you call something a symbol, you're integrating it into human existence. It's not just a physical thing. It's a physical thing that interprets the world, as I've been saying, and also is interpreted by it. And that does mean that, think about the Tesserae Hospitalis. If you end up at war with this family, that item is not going to have the same meaning anymore. It's still going to be meaningful, but it's going to have a different meaning. Or you can imagine the sort of symbolic radiance of something fading over time. I think all those things are possible, and that leads to some interesting questions. Well, how do we prevent that from happening? How do we? And you realize that means that would require having a kind of a comprehensive attentiveness to the world that we make for ourselves. Personally, I'm thinking right now, in terms of cultivating our friendships and living spaces and so forth. I don't know if, did I answer your question? Or?
Yeah, you did.
Okay. Oh, lots of questions, yeah.
So you said that, like, when we open ourselves, like, in wonder to the world around us, this helps us to grow in wisdom. Like, that makes sense to me, but I just want to elaborate, like, how does that help us grow in wisdom?
Yeah, right. There's a lot presupposed in that was said without much explanation, and you're right to ask. If wisdom means growing in knowledge of the truth of things, I would say that real things that have a symbolic meaning in precisely the sense that I've been describing, and that are appreciated as such, help us to understand. I mean, think about it. It helps us to understand ourselves better. We come to understand that we are inseparably body and soul. We're rational animal. You know, this is an important point. We tend to, that definition, the classic definition of man is rational animal. We tend to think that means we have a physical part and we add to it a rational part. But we're rational all the way through, and we're animal. Every part of us is rational animal, and that's something that's an important thing to come to learn and recognize. And that's something, it seems to me, an appreciation of the meaningfulness of things makes real, makes actual. It tells us that, but it also lives it and enacts that. It's an enacting of that. So there's a kind of self-knowledge that grows. We grow with knowledge of the world and knowledge of ourselves. I mean, there'd be a dozen other things too, but that's at least the beginning of an answer.
Do you think we need the styrofoam cups of the world in order to appreciate the ceramic mugs of the world? Like, as you said that you didn't really recognize the importance of the wood until later. Like, I know in my personal life, I didn't appreciate my mom using real plates until I would go to friends' houses and they'd be paper plates.
Yeah.
It makes the experience real. Do you think we need those too?
You know, it's probably something of you all will be familiar with this phrase in an Augustinian university, but the happy fault. I don't know that I would say that you need it, but I think that the negative experience. So you wouldn't say. For example, being hurt by a friend helps me understand the meaning of friendship. So I need to go out and try to get hurt as much as I can so that I can really appreciate friends, and we need to have lots of bad friendships in order to make it. So that would be the wrong thing. But you could say that it's not a good thing in itself, but wow, it actually serves this purpose that you can draw an even greater good out of it. And that would be something you might say, I don't think the world is better off with styrofoam cups. I think that if we had never invented styrofoam cups, you might think, okay, think about all the things we couldn't do if we didn't have styrofoam cups. I think, I'm not sure all those things are great things, and we would have found, if they were necessary, we would have found other ways to do them, just like learning a different way to, make nachos or something. You would find a different way to do it if it's important. But the fact that they exist actually does, in a way, increase our opportunities for wisdom. So yes, complicated answer. Are we still doing it? This is great.
Let's do maybe two more.
Two more? You guys can arm wrestle. Which one answers the question? Go ahead.
So you mentioned you're getting more accustomed to a world of stuff. But how should we handle that stuff that's not symbolic, right? I don't put my symbolic things in a basement or in a closet or a storage container.
Yeah.
And is there a way we should view that stuff that's not symbolic? And I think of getting rid of things, I get rid of the things that are not symbolic, right? So do we distance ourselves completely? Is there a happy medium? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, no, thank you.
It's kind of pragmatic.
Right. I actually think that I don't think that there are anything, that there is such a thing as a non-symbolic reality. It's all going to be, maybe it's very low level, but everything is going to be meaningful in some respect, but it can cast a negative meaning on things. And maybe that's what you mean. So, again, styrofoam cups. I mean, it's a facile example, but there's something. I mean, we all recognize the kind of indignity of a styrofoam cup. That's still a symbolic reality. Yeah, it's still a meaningful one. It just conveys it makes present a very different kind of meaning. So we never get away from symbols. We eat symbols, we smell symbols, we touch symbols. Everything we do is symbolic. There's no getting away from it. And so the wisdom comes in cultivating the proper symbols that actually join us together. All right, thank you. One more question? Yes.
First, thank you for your time. It was a great lecture. It's a little vague question, but from your perspective, what arena of life in our world today is in desperate need of a renewal of wonder itself?
Could you read the first part of the question again? I missed. Yeah.
I said, what arena of life in our world today is in desperate need of a renewal of wonder itself?
Yeah. Following up on some of the examples that have been given, maybe I would say in our family life, first of all, because it seems to me because that's where we all grow up, you start in a family, or some either a family or some sort of substitute for it. If you learn to appreciate the meaning of symbol it would communicate itself. I think it would sort of naturally grow. It would give a certain basic form to your imagination and your existence that would then communicate itself to other areas. But that's just one answer. I actually think that we need to develop a much more profound understanding of the symbolism of political authority. I think that's a really, really crucial thing, and again, more crucial than we realize. I think we need to recover a better sense of the symbolic density of liturgy, religious experience, many areas, but yeah, it's all important. That's the answer.